The reply came in 11 minutes. I know, because I counted every single one of them, sitting in my chair at the communications desk of Mirathi Outpost Kethis 4, watching the blinking cursor on my terminal, and wondering if I had just made the worst mistake of my short career. 11 minutes. I had sent a formal diplomatic request across 3 relay jumps to an embassy belonging to a species I had never met, asking for help with a problem my own government had failed to solve for nearly a standard year, and they answered in 11 minutes. The message was 4 words long. Received. Sit tight. We're coming. No formal greeting. No bureaucratic reference number. No promise to review the matter and respond within 10 to 15 business rotations. Just those 4 words from someone named Commander Josie Mwangi, and a silence that followed them like the shadow of something enormous passing overhead. My name is Talvesi Renok. I am a junior trade liaison of the Mirathi Combine, which is a very impressive title for a very unimpressive job. The Mirathi are what the galaxy would call a minor species. We are small, standing about chest height to most bipedal races. We have 4 arms, soft gray skin, wide dark eyes, and a cultural disposition so deeply committed to avoiding conflict that we once negotiated a trade deal for 6 months, rather than admit the other party had accidentally insulted our delegation leader's mother. Our homeworld is classified as a Class 2 garden world, which means gentle weather, abundant vegetation, and nothing in our evolutionary history that ever required us to develop the instinct to fight back. We survive the galaxy through trade. Kethis 4 is a refueling station on the outer edge of Marathi Combine territory. It is the kind of posting they give to junior liaisons they have no particular expectations for. 46 crew, a handful of docking bays, and a view of empty space in every direction. I had been there for 8 months when the trouble started, and I had spent most of those 8 months being quietly bored. The trouble had a name, the Drail Marauders. They were a pirate faction, reptilian raiders who operated out of the deep nebula regions beyond our trade corridors. For most of their existence, they had been a minor irritation, hitting the occasional freighter, stealing cargo, and disappearing before anyone could respond. But in the past year, they had grown bolder. They had blockaded 2 of our primary shipping lanes. They had started making demands, tribute payments, in exchange for safe passage, and when one of our freighter captains refused to pay, they destroyed his ship and everyone on board. 16 Mirathi dead. Not soldiers, because we do not have soldiers. Traders, engineers, navigators. Ordinary people doing ordinary work. They had paid the tribute, hoping it would satisfy the Drail and allow our shipping lanes to reopen. The Drail took the money and raised their demands. They always raise their demands. That is what happens when you show a predator that you are willing to bleed rather than fight. They just keep cutting. So the Central Authority sent a directive to every outpost in the affected region. Explore alternative diplomatic solutions. That was their way of saying they had no idea what to do and were hoping someone else would figure it out. I was the someone else. I sat at my desk for 2 days, going through the list of potential allies the Mirathi Combine had cultivated over the centuries. The Velkari hegemony was the most powerful military force in our sector, but they had no strategic interest in protecting Mirathi shipping lanes, and their diplomatic fees were ruinous. The Thessic Concordat had a respectable fleet, but their last 3 mutual defense agreements had all ended with the Thessic extracting territorial concessions from their supposed partners. Every option I found came with strings attached, conditions that would cost us almost as much as the piracy itself. Then I found the Terrans. They were relatively new to the galactic scene, roughly 90 standard years since first contact. Their embassy was 3 relay jumps from Kethis 4, close by interstellar standards. They had a growing reputation as a capable military power, though most of the reports I could find focused less on their capabilities and more on their classification. Deathworlders. High gravity, extreme weather, predators in every biome, toxic atmosphere by the standards of most oxygen-breathing species. The fact that intelligent life had evolved there at all was considered a statistical anomaly. The fact that it had evolved to be social, cooperative, and technologically advanced was considered genuinely alarming. I had never met a human. Most Mirathi had not. Our species existed in different circles. They were explorers and warriors. We were merchants and diplomats. Our paths rarely crossed. And when they did, the cultural briefings were very clear on protocol. Do not challenge them to competitive games. Do not make sudden movements in their presence. Do not interpret the showing of teeth as a threat display, as among humans it indicates friendliness. Do not underestimate their pack-bonding instinct, which can cause them to form intense emotional attachments to other species, sometimes within minutes of first contact. That last note should have been my warning. I did not pay enough attention to it. I described the situation. I provided data on the Drael Marauders, their approximate fleet strength, their area of operations, and the impact on Marathi trade routes. We could pay, of course. We always paid. I sent the message and expected nothing. A form acknowledgement, perhaps. A referral to the appropriate department. Maybe, if I was lucky, a response within a few rotations, indicating that the matter was under review. 11 minutes. Received. Sit tight. We're coming. I stared at that message for a long time. I read it again. Not "we'll look into it." Not "your request has been forwarded to the relevant department." Not "please submit Form 7B through the proper channels and allow 6 to 8 rotations for processing." She responded with a single line. "What did you do?" I did not know how to answer her. I still do not. Honestly. What I did was send a polite letter asking for directions to a hardware store, and what I got back was a promise that a construction crew was already on the way to rebuild my entire house. The days that followed were strange. I went about my duties on Kethis 4, managing refueling schedules and trade documentation, but there was a tension underneath everything now. A waiting. The other crew members could feel it too. Old Dremic, who had been working trade routes since before I was born and had seen more of the galaxy than anyone else on the station, pulled me aside one evening in the mess hall. "You contacted the Terrans," he said. "Not a question." "I sent a request for assistance," I said carefully. He looked at me with those deep, dark Mirathi eyes, the ones that had watched a freighter full of people he knew get torn apart by Drael weapons fire 3 months earlier. "You do not request assistance from Deathworlders, Talvesi. You do not make requests of them at all. You open a door, and then you stand back." "They are a diplomatic partner," I said. "They have trade relations with dozens of species. They are not unreasonable." "They are not unreasonable." Dremic agreed. "They are something much more dangerous than unreasonable. They are loyal." He said the word like it was a warning, like it was the name of a disease. "I met a Terran once, 40 years ago. A cargo handler at a transit station. We shared a meal. He spent the entire time asking about my family. Wanted to know the names of my children, my home region, what foods we liked. I thought he was gathering intelligence. He was not. He was making a friend. And I learned later that when a Terran makes a friend, they will walk through fire for that friend. Literal fire. Talvesi. They will walk into flames for people they have shared a single meal with." He paused. "You have asked them for help. They have said they are coming. I suggest you prepare for whatever that means." I did try to prepare. I organized our data files. I compiled every report on the Drael Marauders that Kethis 4 had on record. I reviewed the station's docking protocols to ensure we could accommodate a Terran shuttle. I even looked up human dietary requirements in case I needed to provide refreshments. None of it prepared me. On the 4th day after my message, our long-range sensor operator, a quiet young Mirathi named Petha, leaned back from her console and said, in a voice that was trying very hard to be calm, "Liaison Renok, I am detecting incoming vessels." How many? She did not answer right away. She was checking her instruments, recalibrating, checking again. Her 4 hands moved across the console in rapid, nervous patterns. Petha. How many vessels? She looked up at me. Her eyes were very wide. 38. The word hit me like a physical force. I opened my mouth and closed it again. Each contact was marked with the standard identification codes that all registered vessels broadcast, and every single one carried the same prefix, TCS, Terran Commonwealth Ship. Every member of the station crew gathered at the observation deck within minutes. 46 Marathi, pressed against the transparent panels, watching as the Terran 9th Rapid Response Group organized itself in our space, with the quiet efficiency of a predator settling into a hunting crouch. Destroyers and frigates moved into screening positions. 2 heavy cruisers took up flanking stations. A carrier, the TCS Iron Meridian, sat at the center of the formation like a queen on a game board, and as we watched, small shapes began launching from its bays in disciplined waves. Dozens of them, spreading out in search patterns, setting up a sensor network that covered the entire sector. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Old Dremic stood next to me, and I heard a quiet splashing sound and looked down to see that he had lost control of his bladder. I was not entirely sure I had not done the same thing. 2 hours. That was how long it took the Terran fleet to deploy a complete tactical sensor network across our sector. Our own analysts had estimated that a fleet twice that size would need a full rotation to accomplish the same task. The humans did it in 2 hours, and they did it with the casual precision of people who had done this sort of thing many, many times before. Standing there on that observation deck, watching those warships move through our space like they owned it, I understood for the first time what Dremic had been trying to tell me. I had opened a door, and what had come through it was something my species had no framework to understand. A species that does not know the meaning of proportional. I stood at the airlock with my best diplomatic posture, all 4 hands folded in the formal greeting position, wearing my cleanest uniform. My hearts were pounding so hard I could feel them in my throat. The airlock opened, and Commander Josie Mwangi stepped onto my station. She was tall. Not the tallest species I had seen, but tall enough that I had to tilt my head back to make eye contact. Her skin was dark, a rich brown that caught the station lights. Her hair was cut very close to her head. She wore a military uniform that was pressed and neat, but showed signs of wear. A uniform that had been used, not displayed. Behind her came 4 other humans, 2 men and 2 women, all in similar attire, all carrying themselves with the easy alertness of people who were always ready for something to go wrong. Mwangi looked at me. She smiled. I had read the briefing. I knew it was not a threat, but knowing something intellectually and believing it in your gut are 2 very different things. She was showing her teeth, all of them. Among the Mirathi, a display like that from someone twice your size would mean you were about to be eaten. My instincts screamed at me to run. My training held me in place. She extended one of her hands. I had read about this too. The human greeting ritual called a handshake. I had 4 hands to choose from, and I froze for a moment, unsure which one to offer. She solved the problem by reaching for my upper right hand without hesitation, wrapping her fingers around mine, and giving it a firm squeeze that was carefully calibrated to be strong enough to feel meaningful, but gentle enough not to hurt. Later, I learned that she had read our cultural brief on the shuttle ride over. She knew that the upper right hand was the one Mirathi reserved for greetings of respect. She had studied my species for the duration of a shuttle flight, and she had gotten it right. Liaison Renok, she said. Commander, my voice was steadier than I expected. Thank you for responding. Though I should say, your response is somewhat more than we anticipated. She looked at me with an expression I could not read. It was not confusion exactly. It was more like the look you might give someone who had just said something so obvious that you were not sure whether they were joking. 16 of your people are dead, she said. You asked for help. What exactly did you think we were going to do? I did not have an answer for that. I had thought they were going to recommend a contractor. Maybe lend us a few escort ships. Something measured, something proportional, something that fit neatly into the diplomatic frameworks I had been trained to work within. Instead, they had sent a fleet. Mwangi and her team moved through Kethis 4 like a weather system. Within an hour of boarding, they had set up a temporary command post in our largest conference room, converting it from a space where we held boring trade review meetings into something that looked like the nerve center of a military operation. Portable displays went up on every wall. Communication equipment was deployed with practice speed. A young officer with sandy hair and quick hands, introduced to me as Ensign Grace Elliott, had our station's data network interfaced with the Terran fleet's systems before I had finished my second cup of tea. They wanted everything, every piece of data we had on the Drael Marauders, shipping schedules, communication intercepts, star charts, sensor logs, maintenance records, crew manifests. Things I would not have thought relevant, they asked for. Things I had forgotten we even had, they found. But what surprised me most was that they did not just want data, they wanted stories. A Terran intelligence officer named Lucy Harper sat down with old Dremic in the mess hall and asked him to tell her, in his own words, what had happened the day the freighter was destroyed. Dremic had been on a nearby station when it happened, close enough to pick up the emergency broadcasts, close enough to hear the voices of people he knew as they died. He had never talked about it. None of us had asked. Among the Mirathi, we process grief privately. We do not burden others with our pain. Lucy Harper asked, and Dremic told her. He talked for over an hour. He described the sounds, the final transmissions, the names of the crew members he had known personally. He described the silence after the transmission stopped. And I watched, from across the mess hall, as Lucy Harper listened to every word. She did not interrupt, she did not take notes on a device. She sat there, her eyes on his face, and she listened. When he finished, she thanked him. She put her hand on his arm, which is not a Mirathi gesture of comfort, but which Dremic seemed to understand anyway. And as she stood to leave, I saw her face in profile, and there was something in her eyes that I recognized even across the species barrier. It was not sadness exactly, it was colder than sadness. It was the look of someone who had just added a name to a list, and the list was one that someone was going to pay for. The planning session happened that evening. Mongangi invited me as a courtesy, she said, though I suspected it was also because she wanted me to understand what was about to happen. They stood around a holographic display that showed our sector in three-dimensional detail, and they talked about the Drael Marauders the way a surgeon talks about a tumor. They already knew where the Drael base was. This was the moment I realized how far out of my depth I truly was. The Mirathi Combine had been searching for the Drael's hidden base for months. We had deployed sensor probes, analyzed trade route data, cross-referenced attack patterns. We had found nothing. The Terrans had known the location for weeks. They had intelligence networks that we did not even know existed, sources and methods that Mwangi politely declined to discuss when I asked. The base was in the Kellis Nebula, a dense cloud of dust and ionized gas that played havoc with most sensor systems. The Drael had converted an old mining station into their headquarters. They had roughly a dozen armed ships and a ring of automated defense platforms. "So here is the plan," Mwangi said, standing at the display with her hands clasped behind her back. She did not look at notes. She did not consult a datapad. She had the entire tactical picture in her head. "We are not going to escort Mirathi freighters past the Drael. We are not going to negotiate with them, bribe them, or ask them nicely to stop. We are going to find them. We are going to remove their ability to threaten anyone ever again. And we are going to make sure that everyone in this sector knows what happens when you target our friends." She said the word friends the way she might have said family, like it was not a diplomatic classification, but a statement of fact that she was prepared to defend with everything she had. A tactical officer named Daniel Cole walked the room through the assault plan. They called the formation the Jaw. 2 battle groups would sweep wide around the nebula, approaching from opposite flanks. A third group, led by the Iron Meridian, would drive straight through the center. The electronic warfare ship, TCS Silent Fury, would jam all Drael communications in the opening seconds. Fighters would neutralize the defense platforms. Then the destroyers would close in and take apart the raider fleet, piece by piece. With obsessive, methodical, almost artistic precision, every variable accounted for, every contingency mapped, every possible outcome analyzed and prepared for. "Is all of this necessary?" I asked, and immediately regretted how small my voice sounded in that room full of predators. Mwangi looked at me. That calm, steady gaze that I was beginning to recognize as her default state. Not angry, not aggressive, just certain. Absolutely, immovably certain. "You asked us for a favor, Talvesi," she said. "We do not do small favors." Then she smiled, teeth and all, and I understood with perfect clarity why the galaxy called Earth a death world. I should not have been on the bridge of the TCS Harrow's Gate. I knew this. Every regulation in the Marathi Diplomatic Handbook said that civilian liaisons should not be present during military operations. At least 3 interstellar treaties had specific clauses prohibiting non-combatant observers on warships during active engagements. The Combined Central Authority would have had a collective panic attack if they had known where I was. Commander Mongi had invited me anyway. She said it was important that I see what happens when someone hurts her friends. I still was not sure when she had decided we were friends. Humans, I was learning, make that decision without asking permission. They just look at you one day, and something shifts behind their eyes, and suddenly, you are part of their pack. You do not get a vote. You do not get a formal notification. You just are. They were built for armored soldiers to run through at full speed without colliding. The walls were reinforced to a degree that seemed excessive, until you remembered that this species had evolved on a world where the ground itself could shake hard enough to collapse buildings. The lighting shifted from standard white to a deep red when the combat alert sounded, and I learned later that this was a holdover from ancient Terran naval tradition, preserving night vision for crew members who might need to operate in damaged, unlit sections of the ship. Everything on that ship was built for a worst case that the humans assumed was not a matter of if, but when. Playing music from portable speakers, a group of engineers were arguing about something called football with a passion that suggested they might come to blows, though they never did. A young ensign named Grace Elliott, the same one who had linked our station's network to theirs, found me shivering in a corridor and brought me a blanket. "Ship's set for our comfort temperature," she said apologetically. "You're probably freezing. Here, this one's from my bunk. It's the softest one I've got." She also tried to feed me. The humans seemed to regard food as both fuel and social bonding ritual. A cook from the ship's mess offered me something called chili, which smelled like a chemical weapon, and which I politely declined after Grace quietly warned me that it would likely cause a Mirathi digestive system to stage a full revolt. Instead, Someone found a container of plain grain mash that was close enough to Mirathi standard rations to be edible, and I ate it while sitting in the ship's recreation area, surrounded by humans who treated me like I had always been there. A weapons technician named Pete Gallagher taught me a card game called Spades. I did not understand the rules, and I am fairly sure he made some of them up as we went along, but he was patient and kind, and he laughed at his own mistakes more than mine. An intelligence analyst whose name I never caught showed me photographs of her children on a portable display and asked if Mirathi Young were also difficult at the age of 3. A maintenance engineer fell asleep in his chair, and his colleagues drew something on his face with a marking tool and then took photographs, and everyone seemed to find this tremendously funny. They were kind, genuinely, warmly, disarmingly kind, and in less than an hour, they were going to go into battle with the same casual confidence they brought to card games and practical jokes. The contrast was so jarring that I could not reconcile it. How could a species be this gentle and this dangerous at the same time? How could the same people who worried about whether I was cold enough sleep also be capable of what I was about to witness? The answer, I think, is that humans do not see a contradiction. They are kind because they are dangerous, not in spite of it. The kindness is what they fight for. The danger is how they protect it. The combat alert sounded at 0347 ship time. The red lighting dropped over the bridge like a curtain, and every human on that ship shifted from relaxed to focused in the span of a single heartbeat. It was not a panicked shift. There was no shouting, no scrambling, no visible fear. It was more like watching a machine engage its gears. One moment they were people. The next they were something else entirely. Something precise and coordinated, and utterly without hesitation. I stood at the back of the bridge with a safety harness holding me in place, watching the tactical display as the 9th Rapid Response Group moved into the Kellis Nebula like 3 fingers closing into a fist. The Drael Marauders had 11 armed ships and a ring of defense platforms around their converted mining station. They had been operating in this nebula for years. They knew the terrain. They had sensor equipment adapted to the ionized dust clouds. They should have had the advantage. Eight seconds into the engagement, every Drael communication channel went dark, jammed so completely that the pirates could not even finish their distress calls. One moment they were a coordinated fighting force, the next they were blind, deaf, and alone. The fighters from the Iron Meridian hit the defense platforms next. 36 small, fast attack craft sweeping through the nebula dust in formations so tight they looked like flocks of birds. The platforms were automated, designed to track and target large, slow-moving vessels like freighters. They were not designed for this. The fighters dismantled them in under 2 minutes, each one targeted by a precise volley that disabled its weapons and power systems without destroying it entirely. The humans were not wasting ammunition. They were being efficient. Then the destroyers closed in. I watched on the tactical display as 9 Terran destroyers converged on the Drael fleet from 3 directions simultaneously. The pirate ships tried to scatter. Some tried to fight. One attempted to surrender. The destroyers processed each response with the same mechanical precision. Ships that fled were intercepted. Ships that fought were outgunned. The one that tried to surrender was boxed in and held in place by 2 destroyers that covered it with enough firepower to ensure compliance without firing a shot. On the bridge of the Harrow's Gate, a weapons officer named Daniel Cole hummed a quiet tune to himself while coordinating firing solutions for the entire engagement. Each command he issued was followed by a flash on the tactical display as another Drael ship went dark, and he tracked each one with the calm professionalism of someone checking items off a grocery list. That was the thing that disturbed me most. Not the scale of it, not the speed, the calm. These people were not excited, they were not angry, they were not afraid. They were doing a job, and they were doing it well, and they had absolutely no doubt about the outcome. The bridge crew operated with the relaxed focus of experts performing a task they had trained for 1,000 times. I saw no hesitation, no second guessing, no moral wrestling. They had been given a mission, and they were completing it. And the emotional weight of what they were doing would be dealt with later, in private, the way humans apparently deal with most of their emotional weight. "11 Drael ships disabled or destroyed. The mining station was boarded by Terran Marines, who breached the airlocks in 3 locations simultaneously and secured the facility in under 9 minutes. The Drael leader, a scarred reptilian named Vrek, who had personally ordered the destruction of Marathi freighters, was captured alive. Mukwangi had specifically ordered this. She wanted him to face justice. human justice, which I later learned involved something they called a war crimes tribunal, and which was apparently much worse than simply being killed in battle. The silence after the engagement ended was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I stood on the bridge, my harness digging into my shoulders, my 4 hands gripping the safety rail, and I stared at the tactical display. The Drael marauders, who had terrorized Marathi shipping lanes for a year, who had killed 16 of my people, who had built a reputation as the most dangerous pirates in the sector, had been dismantled in the time it took me to eat a meal. Then something happened that I did not expect. The fleet did not leave. The destroyers did not break formation and warp out. Instead, they began rescue operations. 3 Drael ships had surrendered during the engagement. The humans took prisoners. A Drael raider with a wounded leg was carried by 2 Marines who could have simply dragged him. A medic named Nora Briggs knelt beside a Drael pirate who had been injured by debris and treated his wounds with gentle, practiced hands. This was a pirate, a raider, possibly someone who had participated in the murder of Marathi civilians. And a human medic was cleaning his wounds and applying bandages and speaking to him in a calm, reassuring voice. Mwangi appeared beside me on the bridge. She must have come up from the Combat Information Center. She looked tired but satisfied, the way someone looks after finishing a long day of hard work. Not triumphant, not bloodthirsty, just done. The Marines had found something in the lower levels of the facility, something that no one had expected, something that changed everything. 12 Mirathi, alive. They were freighter crew from the ships the Drael had destroyed. We had counted them among the dead. Their families had mourned them. Memorials had been held. But the Drael had not killed them all. They had kept 12 of them, held them in the mining station as forced labor, working them in shifts to maintain the pirate base's systems. 12 Mirathi. 3 months in captivity. Malnourished, injured, terrified. One of them was a child, a girl of about 6 standard years, who had been traveling with her parents on one of the destroyed freighters. The Terran Marines handled them like they were made of glass. I watched the footage later, from helmet cameras and security monitors. I watched Marines in full combat gear, people who had just stormed a pirate base and neutralized dozens of armed hostiles, kneel down in the dirt of that mining station and speak to my people in soft, gentle voices. I watched them wrap blankets around trembling shoulders. I watched them offer water and rations, carefully selected for Mirathi dietary compatibility, because someone, somewhere in the chain of command, had thought to include Mirathi-safe food in the rescue supply kits. I watched a Marine named Owen Marsh, a man who stood over 6 feet tall and was wearing enough protective gear to stop a plasma bolt, pick up the Mirathi child, and cradle her against his chest plate. She was tiny in his arms, fragile and small and shaking, and he whispered to her, in Mirathi, broken, badly pronounced Mirathi, that he was reading off a translation guide displayed on the inside of his helmet visor. He had learned the words 10 minutes earlier, phonetically sounding them out while breaching an airlock, so that when he found civilians on the other side, he could say, "You are safe now," in their own language. That was the moment I broke. It was not just grief, though there was grief in it. It was not just relief, though the relief was overwhelming. It was something I had never felt before, something that had no word in the Mirathi language. The nearest human, a tactical officer named Helen Shaw, put her hand on my back and said nothing. She just stood there, her palm warm against my spine, and let me cry. No one on that bridge looked at me with judgment. No one told me to compose myself. No one seemed to think there was anything wrong with a grown Mirathi weeping openly in the middle of a military command center. Mwangi found me later. It was beautiful in the indifferent way that space is always beautiful, unconcerned with the small dramas of the creatures who move through it. She sat down beside me, She did not speak for a long time. We just sat there, two different species from two different worlds, watching the nebula swirl. Then she said, quietly, "This is why we came, Talvesi. Not for the fight, for them." She meant the captives. She meant the 12 people that everyone else had given up on. "I thought they were dead," I said. My voice was hoarse. "I know," she said. "Everyone did. But we always check. We always look. Because sometimes they are not dead, and if there is even a chance, even the smallest chance, that someone is still alive and waiting for help, then we go. That is not a military doctrine. That is just who we are." I looked at her. This woman who had crossed 3 relay jumps with 38 warships, because a species she had never met, sent a single message asking for help. This woman, who had planned the destruction of a pirate fleet, with surgical precision, and then insisted that the survivors be treated with dignity. This woman who had ordered her Marines to carry Mirathi-compatible food rations into a combat zone, just in case. "Why?" I asked. It was the only word I could find. She thought about it for a moment. Not because she did not know the answer, but because she wanted to give me an honest one. "Because someone hurt people who could not fight back," she said. "And where I come from, that is something you do not let stand. Not today, not ever." She looked out at the nebula. "My grandmother used to say that the measure of a person is not how they treat their equals. It is how they treat someone who cannot do anything for them in return. Someone small, someone scared, someone who has nothing to offer but the fact that they need help." She paused. "That is the oldest law my species has. Talvesi. Older than our governments. Older than our nations. Older than our written language. When someone is hurting, you help. You do not calculate the cost. You do not weigh the benefit. You help. And if someone is doing the hurting, you stop them. With words if you can. With force if you must. But you stop them." I sat with that for a long time. I turned it over in my mind, the way you turn over a stone and find something alive underneath. Something you were not expecting. Something that changes how you see the ground you have been walking on. We have risk assessments and cost-benefit analyses and diplomatic frameworks designed to ensure that every interaction produces a measurable return. We are very good at these things. They have kept us alive for centuries in a galaxy that does not care about small, soft herbivores. But we have nothing like what Josie Mwangi just described. This raw, simple, almost aggressive compassion. This willingness to spend blood and treasure and time, not because the numbers make sense, but because someone was hurting, and hurting people is wrong, and that is enough. I did not understand it. I am not sure I understand it even now, but sitting in that observation lounge, watching the nebula glow, I knew that I was looking at something the Marathi had never encountered before. Not just strength, not just kindness. The two of them fused together into something greater than either one alone. Something terrifying. Something wonderful. The news traveled faster than light. Not literally, of course, but it felt that way. Within a day of the Battle of Kellis Nebula, every major communications network in the sector was carrying the story. Within 3 days, it had reached the Galactic Forum. Within a week, it had become the most discussed event in interstellar diplomacy since the Terran First Contact itself. The reactions were as varied as the species offering them. The Marathi Combine responded with stunned gratitude and a formal commendation that used the phrase, exceeding all expectations, so many times that it began to lose meaning. The Dolun Collective, a quiet species of aquatic engineers who had been dealing with their own pirate problems, sent a private inquiry to the Terran embassy, asking for details about collaborative security arrangements. The Iskari, a species of insectoid traders who operated in neighboring sectors, published a formal statement that was diplomatically neutral on the surface, but was, if you knew how to read Iskari subtext, essentially saying, "We would also like some of that, please." But not everyone was pleased. The Velkari hegemony was furious. The Velkari were the dominant military power in our region of the galaxy, a position they had held for centuries, and which they guarded with the jealous attention of someone who knows their throne is more comfortable than they deserve. They were a large reptilian species, not unlike the Drael in appearance, though they would have been insulted by the comparison, and they maintained their influence through a combination of military strength and carefully managed fear. The Terran response to the Drael had upended the balance of power in a single afternoon, and the Velkari knew it. Their representative at the Galactic Forum, a broad-shouldered general named Kurthax, demanded an emergency session. He stood at the speaking platform and called the Terran action disproportionate aggression against a minor threat, and he accused the Terrans of using the Marathi situation as a pretext to project military power into a region where they had no historical presence. He demanded sanctions. He demanded formal censure. He demanded, in a voice that echoed through the forum chambers, that the Terrans be put in their place. I watched the broadcast from Kethis 4, sitting in the mess hall with old Dremic and half the station crew. We watched Kurthax pound the speaking platform with his fist and shout about galactic stability, and Dremic leaned over to me and said, "He is afraid." "Afraid of what?" I asked. "Afraid of what it means if the Terrans are willing to do this for the Marathi. Because if they will do this for a minor trade species that they have no treaty obligations to, what will they do for someone they actually have an agreement with? What will they do for a true ally?" Dremic was right. Kurthax was not angry about disproportionate force. He was angry because the Terrans had just demonstrated, in front of the entire galaxy, that the Velkari were not the only ones willing to use overwhelming power to protect their interests. And worse, the Terrans had done it not for territory, or resources, or strategic advantage. They had done it because someone asked nicely. That was the part the Velkari could not comprehend. Strength deployed without selfish motive. Power exercised, not to gain something, but to give something back. It broke their model of how the galaxy worked. It broke a lot of species models. Where Mwangi was military, direct, and physical, Vasquez was diplomatic, measured, and precise. She was a woman who appeared to be in her sixth decade, with silver hair pulled back from a face that had the kind of calm that comes from having been through things that would break lesser people, and having come out the other side with her spine intact. She spoke Galactic Standard with barely any accent, and she had the rare ability to make silence feel louder than words. She waited for the chamber to settle. She let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then she began speaking, and her voice was quiet, not loud, not aggressive, quiet, in a way that made you lean forward to hear her, which meant that every delegate in that chamber was literally bending toward her before she had finished her first sentence. She showed images, not of the battle, not of the Terran fleet in its victory formation. She showed the freed Mirathi captives, the 12 people who had been given up for dead. She showed them being carried from the mining station, thin and injured, and blinking in the harsh light of rescue. She showed the child in Owen Marsh's arms. She showed the medical treatment, the blankets, the water. She let the images speak for a full minute without commentary. Then she read the names. All 16 Mirathi who had been killed by the Drael marauders. She read each name clearly, carefully, with the pronunciation as close to correct as a human vocal apparatus could manage. 16 names. 16 people who had been going about their ordinary lives when ordinary stopped. Then she presented the evidence. Communication logs showing the Drael's escalating demands. Records of their attacks. Documentation of the forced labor they had imposed on their Mirathi captives. She laid it out the way a surgeon lays out instruments before an operation, each piece in its place, each fact positioned for maximum impact. And then she spoke. I have the records here, filed in proper order, with all the correct reference numbers and diplomatic codes. 7 formal requests for help. 7 times. The Marathi told this body that their people were being attacked, their ships destroyed, their citizens killed. 7 times, this forum tabled the matter, deferred it, assigned it to a subcommittee, or simply ignored it. She paused. She looked around the chamber. Every delegate, every species, one by one. Perhaps this forum should ask itself why a species of dangerous Deathworlders showed more compassion than every delegate in this chamber combined. No one spoke. I had seen recordings of Galactic Forum sessions before. There was always noise, always crosstalk, always the background murmur of delegates consulting with their aides. Not now. Now there was silence so complete, you could hear the environmental systems humming in the walls. Vasquez let that silence hold for 10 full seconds. Then she gathered her materials and walked back to the Terran delegation's seats, and she did not look back. Kurthax tried to respond. He stood up and opened his mouth, and then closed it again, and for the first time in my life, I saw a Velkari general look small. The aftermath of that speech restructured the political landscape of our sector in ways that are still unfolding. Within days of the forum session, the Terran diplomatic team did something no one expected. They did not leave. Mwangi and her fleet remained in the sector, establishing a semi-permanent patrol along the Mirathi trade corridors. They offered to train Mirathi crews in emergency response protocols, defensive maneuvering, and basic combat awareness. They set up a direct, real-time communication link between Kethis 4 and the nearest Terran Fleet Command, so that if anything like the Drail situation ever happened again, the response time would be measured in hours, not days. I asked Mwangi about this during one of our meetings, which had become regular, and which I had stopped thinking of as diplomatic briefings, and started thinking of as conversations with a friend. A permanent patrol, training programs, a communication infrastructure. The cost must be substantial. What is the Combine expected to provide in return? She gave me that look again. The one that said I had asked a question so obvious that she was not sure I was serious. Nothing, she said. Nothing. This is the Shepherd Doctrine, she said. Any species that asks Earth for help becomes a protected partner. Not a vassal, not a subject, a friend. In the Marathi worldview, every relationship was transactional, every alliance had terms and conditions, every favor came with an expected return. The idea of providing military protection to another species with no expectation of repayment was so foreign to Marathi thinking that I literally did not have a framework to process it. Among humans, she continued, If your friend calls you in the middle of the night because they are in trouble, you do not send advice. You get in your vehicle, and you go to them. You do not calculate whether it is cost-effective. You do not check whether the favor will be reciprocated. You just go, because they are your friend, and they need you, and that is enough. But this unconditional willingness to sacrifice for someone who simply asked for help, we have no word for it. She taught me the human word, loyalty. And then she taught me another one, family. That is what you are now, she said, whether you like it or not. In the weeks that followed, I watched something happen that I had never seen before in Mirathi history. My people began to change. The 12 freed captives were returned to their families in a ceremony that was broadcast across the entire Combine. The child, whose name was Letha, was reunited with her parents in a moment so raw and emotional that even the Marathi news commentators, who were professionally trained to maintain composure, could not keep their voices steady. The Terran Marines who had rescued the captives were invited to attend, and Owen Marsh, the giant who had carried Letha through the ruins of the pirate base, stood at the back of the ceremony hall in his dress uniform, with tears running down his face. He did not try to hide them. Humans, I was learning, are not ashamed of tears. The station kitchen had developed a small repertoire of dishes that both species could eat, carefully balanced between Mirathi herbivore requirements and human omnivore preferences. The results were not always successful, but the effort was always appreciated. Old Dremic, who had started the whole affair by telling me I did not understand what I had set in motion, had become the unlikely social organizer of these dinners. He fussed over the table settings and the food preparation and the seating arrangements with a dedication that suggested he had found a new purpose in life. That evening, he stood up from his chair and raised a glass of something the humans had brought. They called it bourbon, and it smelled like what I imagine a chemical fire would smell like, if a chemical fire could somehow also be smooth and warm and amber-colored. Dremic had tried it once and had coughed for 5 minutes straight, but he had apparently developed a taste for it, which I found alarming but chose not to question. He raised his glass and spoke in broken Terran standard, that he had been practicing in secret for weeks. "To big friends," he said, "who come when you call." The humans cheered. Someone started singing a song, something rhythmic and warm that I did not recognize, but that seemed to carry centuries of feeling in its melody. My crew did not know the words, but they hummed along, and the sound of Mirathi voices and human voices, blending together in that small mess hall on a forgotten outpost at the edge of nowhere, was, I think, the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. I sat at that table, surrounded by people from two different worlds, and I realized that I was witnessing something rare. Not a treaty, not an alliance of convenience. Something older, something more primal. A bond, forged not in negotiation chambers or trade agreements, but in the simple, terrifying, magnificent act of showing up when it mattered. Later that night, after the humans had returned to their ships and my crew had gone to sleep, I sat at my communications desk and composed a message to my superiors at the Combine Central Authority. It was the most important message I would ever send, and I spent a long time getting the words right. My formal recommendation read as follows: upgrade Terran diplomatic status from Deathworld Observer to Priority Ally, highest trust. I do not believe those two things are contradictions. I believe they are the same thing. I felt safe. but because somewhere out there, between the stars, a Terran patrol cruiser was gliding along our trade corridors, crewed by people who had decided, without being asked, that protecting us was worth their time, and their treasure, and their lives. Because that was enough. One standard year later, I stood at a podium on the observation deck of Kethis 4 and looked out at a crowd that would have been unimaginable 12 months before. The deck had been expanded for the occasion. What had once been a cramped viewing area on a minor refueling station was now a formal assembly space, fitted with seating for 300, communication arrays for live broadcast across the sector, and a memorial wall made of polished Mirathi stone on which 16 names had been carved in letters deep enough to last 1,000 years. The crowd was mixed. Mirathi delegates from the Central Authority sat alongside Terran officers in dress uniforms. Diplomats from the Dolun Collective and the Askari Confederacy occupied a section near the back. Observers from species who had watched what happened here and drawn their own conclusions. Journalists from a dozen worlds carried recording equipment and broadcast rigs. And in the front row, wearing new clothes and carrying themselves with the quiet strength of people who had walked through something terrible and come out the other side, sat the 12 freed captives and their families. Letha was there. The child Owen Marsh had carried through the wreckage. She was 7 now, a year older and a lifetime wiser. And she sat on her mother's lap with the particular seriousness that children adopt when they know something important is happening, even if they do not fully understand what it is. Owen Marsh sat 2 seats away from her, in his dress uniform, his hands folded in his lap. Letha kept looking over at him and waving, and he kept waving back, and each time he did it, his eyes got a little brighter, and he had to blink a few extra times. Commander Josie Mongi was there, standing near the memorial wall with her hands clasped behind her back. Ambassador Elena Vasquez sat in the front row beside the Mirathi Central Authority chairperson, and the two of them were engaged in quiet conversation that looked, from my distance, like it might be about something completely unrelated to the ceremony. I had learned that Vasquez was like that. She could discuss galactic policy and weekend gardening plans in the same breath without missing a beat. I was there because someone had to give a speech, and apparently that someone was me. I had been promoted twice in the past year. The Combine Central Authority had created an entirely new position, Mirathi Terran Cultural Liaison, First Class, and they had given it to me. My job was to be the bridge between our species, which was a responsibility I had not asked for, and did not feel qualified for, and which I had accepted anyway, because that is what you do when two peoples have decided to become family, and someone needs to make sure they understand each other. I had changed in other ways too, small ways mostly, but they added up. I had learned to shake hands, upper right, firm grip, 2 seconds, and I had gotten very good at it. I had learned to read human facial expressions with enough accuracy that I could tell the difference between a genuine smile and a polite one, between worry and concentration, between the face a human makes when they are angry and the face they make when they are disappointed, which are not the same thing, and which require very different responses. I had learned that when a human says, "Do not worry about it," they are already solving the problem. I had learned that the phrase, "I am fine," means the exact opposite of what the words suggest, and is actually a request to be asked more questions. I had eaten chili exactly once, at Mwangi's insistence. and I do not wish to discuss what happened afterward, except to say that the station's medical officer used the phrase medically noteworthy in her report, and that Mwangi personally apologized to me for 3 days straight, while also clearly trying very hard not to laugh. I had also learned something larger, something that had reshaped the way I understood not just humans, but the galaxy itself. It tells you about their planet's gravity, its atmosphere, its biome diversity, its hazard rating on a standardized scale. It tells you that a species evolved in conditions that most other intelligent life would consider hostile, dangerous, or outright lethal. It tells you nothing about who they are. The Drael came from a predator-rich environment, and they used their aggression to destroy. The classification told you where each species came from, and for those species, where they came from predicted what they would do. Not humans. Humans came from one of the most dangerous worlds in the catalogued galaxy, a planet that throws earthquakes and hurricanes and volcanic eruptions at its inhabitants with casual regularity, a world where the dominant predators can outrun, outswim, and outclimb almost anything else alive, a world where the weather alone kills thousands every year. By every metric in the galactic classification system, humans should be the most aggressive, the most territorial, the most dangerous intelligent species in existence. And they are. That part the classification gets right. They are all of those things. But the classification misses the part that matters. The part that no algorithm or risk assessment or cultural threat analysis has ever been able to capture. They are all of those things in service of something else. Something the system has no category for. They are dangerous because they love fiercely. They are aggressive because they protect relentlessly. They are territorial because when they claim something as theirs, whether it is a piece of land or a person, or an entire species of small, frightened herbivores on the other side of the galaxy, they will burn the stars down before they let anyone take it away. The galaxy had been looking at humans through the wrong lens. They saw the danger and missed the heart. I was thinking about all of this as I stepped up to the podium and looked out at that crowd, 300 faces from a dozen worlds, all watching me, waiting to hear what the small, nervous Mirathi, who had started all of this with a single message, had to say. I had written my speech in Terran Standard. This was a deliberate choice. The humans had come to our world. They had fought for our people. They had bled beside us, and cried with us, and sat in our mess hall, eating food that probably tasted terrible to them, and pretended to enjoy it, because they knew it mattered to us. The least I could do was speak their language. I gripped the podium with all four hands and I began. One standard year ago, I sat at a communications desk on this station and sent a message to the Terran embassy. It was a short message. I asked for help. I was careful to keep my request modest, because I had been trained, as all Mirathi are trained, to never ask for more than you are willing to pay for. I asked for a recommendation. A contractor, maybe a few escort ships, something small. I paused, looked at Mwangi. She was watching me with those dark, steady eyes. I got a fleet. A ripple of something went through the crowd. Not laughter exactly, recognition. I have spent the past year trying to understand what happened. Why a species I had never met responded to a request for minor assistance by deploying 38 warships. Why Commander Mwangi and her crew traveled 3 relay jumps to fight a battle that was not theirs, against an enemy that had done nothing to them, for people they had never met. I have studied human history, human culture, human psychology. I have read their literature and listened to their music and eaten their food, which I can confirm is an experience that changes you on a fundamental level. A slight stir of laughter, mostly from the human section. Pete Gallagher, the weapons tech who had taught me spades, gave me a thumbs up. I have studied the galaxy's records of first contact with humanity. Every species has a story about the moment they met humans. The Doloon talk about human noise. Apparently, you are a very loud species. Real laughter now. The humans laughed loudest. They always laughed loudest. This was, I had learned, not a flaw, but a feature. But I will tell a different story. I will tell the story of a junior liaison on a forgotten outpost who asked for help, and a species that crossed 3 relay jumps in 4 days because 16 people they had never met were dead, and that was reason enough. The laughter faded. The silence that replaced it was a different kind of silence. A listening silence. An intent silence. I will tell the story of an intelligence officer named Lucy Harper, who sat with an old Mirathi trader for an hour and listened to him describe the worst day of his life, and who did not look away, and who did not change the subject, and who carried the weight of his story out of that room on her own shoulders, because that is what humans do. They carry things for people, whether they are asked to or not. I will tell the story of a Marine named Owen Marsh, who carried a Marathi child through the wreckage of a pirate base and whispered comfort in a language he had learned 10 minutes earlier, sounding out the words from a translation guide on the inside of his helmet, because he could not bear the thought of a frightened child hearing only silence. Owen Marsh was looking at his hands. His jaw was tight. Beside him, Letha reached over and patted his arm with the unself-conscious tenderness that only children possess, and something in his face crumbled and rebuilt itself in the span of a heartbeat. I will tell the story of a commander who looked me in the eye, after I stammered my surprise at the scope of her response, and said the 6 words that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Her eyes were bright. She did not look away. I did not know what to think. I did not know what humans were. I have seen humans in combat. I have seen them dismantle a pirate fleet in 14 minutes, with the casual precision of experts performing routine maintenance. I have seen them plan the application of force with an artistry that made my blood run cold. I leaned forward. But here is what the galaxy does not say. Here is what no classification system has ever captured. What no risk assessment has ever accounted for. What no threat analysis has ever understood. The danger is not the point. It was never the point. The danger is the tool. The purpose. The thing that drives everything humans do. The thing that makes them cross 3 relay jumps with 38 warships for a species they have never met, is something far simpler and far more powerful than aggression. I paused. Let the silence build. Mwangi had taught me that trick. Humans are masters of the dramatic pause. It is love. And they decide who they care about with a speed and a certainty that would terrify any rational species. They looked at the Mirathi, a species of small, frightened herbivores who had never raised a hand in anger in our entire history, and they saw something worth protecting. They saw friends. They saw family. They made that decision in 11 minutes, the time it took Commander Mwangi to receive my message and send her reply, and once they made it, nothing in the galaxy could have changed their minds. The galaxy calls you Deathworlders. I call you friends. And I have learned, this past year, that there is no force in the known universe more powerful, or more terrifying, than a Deathworlder who has decided that you are their friend. I stepped back from the podium. For a moment, there was silence. Complete, perfect silence. Then the applause began. It started with the humans, because of course it did. They are a loud species. But it spread. The Mirathi joined in, all 4 hands clapping in the traditional gesture of respect. The Dolun delegates stamped their feet, which is their equivalent. Even the Askari, who normally communicated approval through subtle antenna movements, were waving their antennae so vigorously that they looked like they were conducting an orchestra. I stood there in the noise and the light and the warmth of 300 people who had come together to remember something terrible and celebrate something wonderful. And I felt the full weight of the year behind me and the years ahead. And I knew that nothing would ever be the same. Not for me, not for the Mirathi, not for the galaxy. The freed captives were surrounded by well-wishers and journalists, and Letha had climbed onto Owen Marsh's shoulders and was surveying the crowd from the highest point in the room with the satisfied expression of a child who has found exactly where she belongs. Mwangi found me at the observation deck. She was wearing her dress uniform, and her eyes were wet, though she would deny it later, with the absolute conviction that humans bring to denying things that are obviously true. "Nice speech, Talvesi," she said. "I learned from the best," I said. "Humans are very good at speeches." She laughed. A real laugh, warm and open and full of teeth. "We are good at a lot of things, mostly the loud, dramatic ones." We stood together at the observation deck, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, a Terran patrol cruiser was gliding along the trade corridor that Marathi freighters now traveled without fear. Somewhere out there, 3 more species were negotiating partnership agreements under the Shepherd Doctrine, drawn by the example of what had happened here. Somewhere out there, the Velkari hegemony was quietly repositioning its diplomatic stance, because even the oldest power in the sector could read the writing on the wall. The galaxy was changing, slowly, the way galaxies do, but unmistakably. And at the center of that change, pushing it forward with the blunt, stubborn, magnificent force that only they could bring, were the humans. The Deathworlders, the loud ones, the ones who showed their teeth when they were happy, and cried when they were sad, and crossed the emptiness between stars because someone small and frightened had asked for help. I thought about the message I sent, 1 year ago, 12 words to an embassy I had never visited, asking for help I did not think I deserved, from a species I did not understand. I thought about the reply, 4 words, 11 minutes. Received. Sit tight, we're coming. I thought about Josie Mwangi, walking through my airlock with that smile that showed all her teeth. I thought about Lucy Harper listening to old Dremek's worst memory, with eyes that carried his pain without flinching. I thought about Nora Briggs bandaging the wounds of an enemy, because that was the right thing to do. I thought about Grace Elliott bringing me a blanket because I was cold. I thought about Pete Gallagher teaching me a card game I was terrible at and laughing at his own mistakes. I thought about Owen Marsh learning Marathi from a translation guide on the inside of his helmet so that a frightened child would hear the words, "You are safe now," in her own language. I thought about all of these things, and I understood, with a clarity that settled into my bones and would never leave, the truth that the galaxy was only beginning to grasp. Deathworlders do not offer minor favors. They send fleets. Not because there is something to be gained, because the friend does. That is all. That is everything. That is the whole of the law, the oldest law, the one that predates every treaty and every constitution and every alliance ever written. When someone you love is hurting, you go. The Mirathi are learning this now. We are learning to be worthy of it. We are learning that the galaxy is not just a network of trade routes and profit margins, but a web of connections between living beings who have the capacity to care for each other across the vast, cold distances between stars. We are learning because the humans taught us, not with lectures or policy papers or diplomatic briefs, with 38 warships and a 14-minute battle, and a Marine who whispered comfort to a child in a language he barely knew. Mwangi stood beside me at the observation deck, and the stars burned in the dark beyond the glass, and somewhere out there the patrols continued, and the trade routes hummed, and the galaxy turned on its ancient axis. And I, Talvesi Renok, Cultural Liaison First Class, formerly a junior nobody on a forgotten outpost, stood beside my friend and watched the future arrive. "Josie," I said. "Yes?" "Thank you." She looked at me, smiled, teeth and all. "Any time, Talvesi, any time." And I knew, with absolute certainty, that she meant it. Every word, every warship, every blanket and card game, and badly pronounced Mirathi lullaby. That is the Terran way, that is the Deathworlders' promise. Not measured, not calculated, not proportional. Total. When they come for you, they come with everything they have. Not because you earned it, not because you paid for it, not because the universe said you deserved it. Because you asked. And for a Deathworlder, that will always, always be enough.